Hello everyone, and welcome to the very first episode of Alex and Books. I'm your host, Alex, and today we'll be covering the book Mastering Fear, a Navy SEALs Guide by Webb and Mann. So, let's get into it. Now this book is a must-read guide for overcoming and mastering fear. Each and every one of us is able to grow as a person and achieve more than we ever thought possible by overcoming our fears. Sometimes the fear is a physical threat, like a drunk person on the street, but the majority of the time the fear is mental, it's in our heads. These are the fears that are holding us back in life and stop us from reaching our full potential. That's why we must master fear. Now, let's learn a little bit more about the authors. For those unfamiliar, Webb is a former United States Navy SEAL and was the head instructor for SEAL snipers. He was deployed to both Iraq and Afghanistan. He is also a New York Times best-selling author and has written several books. The co-author, Mann, is an award-winning author and has written over 20 books that have been published in more than 24 languages. Now let's dive into a few lessons from this book. The first lesson is to practice more than you need to. In Hollywood, when a director films a movie, they spend many hours and sometimes days filming a 1-minute scene over and over again. The same scene can be shot from 20 different angles, but eventually only one clip is chosen. Does that mean that everything was a waste? Not at all. This is what it takes to make a great movie. Practice, practice, and more practice. Brandon tells a story when he was flying with his old flight instructor in a little plane that he had just bought. Brandon went through all the safety checks and they took off. However, while taking off, something didn't sound right, and something didn't smell right either. Brandon then looked down and saw that his leg was soaking wet and fuel was squirting out of the cockpit. This meant that Brandon and his friend were sitting in a puddle of highly flammable liquid in a plane that was 50 years old. If even one of the radios decided to spark, they would find themselves both on fire. Brandon writes that part of the pilot training is mastery of contingency plans. That means pilots run through dozens or even hundreds of what-if scenarios. What to do if the engine goes out, if there's an electrical problem, if communications go down, they train for all of this. It took Brandon only a couple seconds to react to the situation. He immediately shut down all electrical systems. The plane was mechanical, so it could fly without them. And he turned the plane around and started heading towards the original starting point. Brandon writes that he didn't have to spend time thinking about what to do because he had already rehearsed the situation several times. The same thing was done during the Osama bin Laden raid. When one of the helicopters crashed during the missions, the SEALs had already planned and practiced that what-if scenario. They had timed the mission to do it in exactly 40 minutes, and during the actual operation, they got out in 38 minutes. When you prepare more than you need to, and rehearse the worst case scenarios, you get one step closer to mastering fear. Lesson number 2, true safety is an illusion. Everyone has a natural impulse for self-preservation. Fear makes us believe that danger is always around the corner and we should do everything possible to protect ourselves. However, this just isn't possible. There's no such thing as absolute safety. And if you try to live as safely as possible, you'll never really live. The author writes about the 2017 terrorist attack that happened in New York City, where a man stole a van and started running over people. He killed 8 people. Webb points out that he lived just a few blocks from where it happened. He said he could have been there that day walking his dog, where one second he's on the phone hanging out with his dog, and next day he's gone. But it doesn't have to be a terrorist attack. People get hit by distracted drivers every single day. There are a million different ways a person can step outside their home and not come back that day. At the end of the day, humans have no genuine control of what happens to them. We all end up in the same place anyway. This doesn't mean that you don't look both ways when crossing the street, but it does mean staying home because you're afraid of crossing the street isn't the solution. There's a great quote in this book that says, "Every great gain for humanity as a whole, or for you and me in our lives, has come only through risk," and that's true. Lesson number 3. Trust your gut and jump. A lot of times in life, people find themselves in a situation where they know what they have to do and it feels like the universe is telling them to do it, but the people around them tell them to stop. This is why it's important to trust your gut and jump when things feel right. Brandon tells the story of a young mechanic named Douglas Corrigan, who was inspired to fly after Charles Lindbergh flew his plane across the Atlantic. Lindbergh became an American hero and Time magazine named him the first person of the year. Douglas Corrigan, on the other hand, worked for the company that built Lindbergh's plane. He also wanted to fly across the Atlantic. However, the young man faced many problems. For one, he didn't have a plane. He also didn't have a pilot's license and he didn't have money. So what did he do? He worked on getting his license, then he started working as a pilot taking people out for rides. He saved up enough money and eventually bought a plane for himself. Once he bought the plane, he asked the Bureau of Air Commerce to approve his trip from New York to Ireland. However, they said his plane wasn't in the proper condition and denied him. So Corrigan worked on his plane and applied again. Once again, he got denied. He went on to apply 5 more times and he got turned down each time. But that didn't stop Douglas Corrigan. On July 1938, Corrigan had been approved for a flight from New York to California, except that he flew in the other direction, accidentally of course. 8 hours later, he actually landed in Dublin. When flight officials questioned him, he said he must have misread his compass and simply flown in the other direction. When Corrigan returned to New York, he was greeted as a hero, and the New York Post ran a giant headline saying, "Hail to Wrong Way Corrigan." Corrigan is a great example of someone who trusted their gut, ignored the fear and the naysayers, and took the jump into greatness. As it turns out, the author, Brandon Webb, is actually related to Douglas Corrigan, who was a great-grandmother's cousin. So in conclusion, people should learn that they should practice often and rehearse what-if scenarios to always be prepared. And they should know that true safety is an illusion, and that if you play it too safe, you'll live your whole life in fear. And sometimes you just have to trust your gut and jump even when others say no. Now, Brandon Webb and John Mann have done an excellent job with this book. They outline the steps needed to master fear, they give stories and examples, and they also finish each chapter with actionable advice that readers could apply to everyday life. Webb does an excellent job drawing on his business, combat, and personal experience to illustrate the lessons and keep readers hooked to his book. Now, fear will always be a part of our lives. It's even part of Brandon Webb's life, and he was a Navy SEAL. But that's why it's important to understand the tactics needed to overcome fear. So, I think this book is a must-read manual for mastering fear. Each and every one of us is able to grow as a person and achieve more than we ever thought possible by overcoming our fear. Thank you guys so much for watching. This is my first video. Let me know what you think. I really appreciate it if you leave a thumbs up and subscribe. And also let me know what you liked and didn't like in this video. And also what books you would want me to review next. So thank you guys so much for watching. Take care.